The first light of dawn spread across the kingdom of Veildorn like liquid gold, touching marble towers, polished domes, and banners embroidered with silver lions. The capital stirred awake beneath a sky washed in pale rose, its streets filling with merchants, craftsmen, servants, and nobles preparing for another day beneath the watchful eyes of the royal court. Bells chimed from distant towers, mingling with the cries of traders arranging colorful stalls, yet beyond the city's grandeur, where cobblestone roads surrendered to dirt paths lined with wildflowers, stood a weathered cottage embraced by climbing ivy and stubborn hope. Inside, Alara Whitmore knelt beside a basket overflowing with freshly cut blooms. Dew still clung to the petals she had gathered before sunrise, each flower chosen with patient hands that valued beauty even when life offered little in return. She tied the stems together with faded ribbons before carrying the prettiest white rose toward the old woman seated beside the window. Agnes Rowan accepted the flower with trembling fingers, bringing it close enough to breathe in its fragrance. Though her fading eyes could scarcely distinguish colors anymore, she smiled as though she could still see every delicate petal. "It smells like spring," she whispered. "It looks like spring too," Alara replied gently. "One day I'll fill this whole garden with roses just like it." A cheerful laugh echoed from the corner as 7-year-old Noah hurried across the room, his boots far too large for his tiny feet. He wrapped his arms around Alara before stealing a crust of warm bread from the table. "You forgot breakfast again." "I already ate." "You always say that." She ruffled his messy hair instead of answering. The lie had become familiar. There had only been enough bread for Agnes and Noah. Outside, morning mist drifted above rows of carefully tended flowers. Every blossom represented hours of labor, every bouquet another chance to buy medicine, food, or firewood. Alara gathered her baskets, kissed Agnes's forehead, and promised she would return before sunset. The city welcomed wealth more readily than kindness. Elegant carriages rolled across polished streets while jeweled ladies wandered between market stalls searching for luxuries they hardly noticed. Alara found her usual corner near the fountain, arranging crimson poppies beside lavender bundles and snowy roses until the little display resembled a patch of summer amid endless stone. The first customers barely glanced at her. One woman wrinkled her nose. "Country flowers." Another laughed. "They probably carry insects." Their laughter drifted away with the breeze. Hours passed. Only 2 bouquets sold. When noon approached, an extravagant carriage trimmed in gold stopped beside the fountain. Lady Vivian Blackwood emerged draped in emerald silk, every movement polished by privilege. Several ladies followed behind her, eager to imitate every smile. Vivian paused before Alara's flowers. "How charming," she murmured. Hope flickered across Alara's face. "Would you like a bouquet, my lady?" Vivian bent toward a cluster of white roses. "They're surprisingly beautiful." Before Alara could answer, Vivian's smile hardened. "What a shame they belong in such filthy hands." She stepped backward deliberately. The sharp wheel of her carriage rolled directly over the baskets. Stems snapped. Petals scattered across the stones. Fresh blossoms crushed beneath polished wood. Gasps rippled through nearby shoppers. Vivian looked down with practiced innocence. "Oh dear." One of her companions laughed. "I suppose weeds never last long." The women disappeared into the crowd, their laughter echoing behind them. For a long moment Alara simply stared. Weeks of work lay ruined beneath muddy tracks. Her throat tightened. No tears came. Instead, she knelt upon the cold stones and quietly gathered every broken flower. An elderly fruit seller approached carrying a bruised apple. "I'm sorry, child." Alara smiled despite the ache pressing against her heart. "They're only flowers." But they were not only flowers. They had been medicine. They had been bread. They had been tomorrow. The distant sound of trumpets interrupted the marketplace. Conversation stopped. Merchants straightened. Children hurried toward their parents. "The Duke," someone whispered. Within moments, soldiers dressed in silver armor appeared along the avenue, clearing the streets with disciplined precision. Behind them rolled an elegant black carriage adorned with the Ashford crest, its polished wheels reflecting the afternoon sun. Inside sat Duke Adrian Ashford. From the outside, he seemed every inch the perfect nobleman. Calm. Reserved. Untouchable. Yet his thoughts wandered far beyond cheering crowds. He barely noticed the admiration lining the streets. His gaze lingered instead upon gardens blooming outside distant windows, reminders of quieter days spent beside his late mother before grief transformed the palace into little more than another prison built from marble. The carriage continued through the marketplace. Then everything happened at once. A frightened little boy chased a wooden toy into the street. His mother screamed. Horses reared. Guards shouted. The child froze directly before the approaching procession. Without thinking, Alara dropped every remaining bouquet and ran. She reached the boy seconds before the horses. Wrapping both arms around him, she threw them sideways onto the cobblestones. Her flower baskets overturned. Hundreds of blossoms burst across the road like scattered pieces of a rainbow. The lead horse halted only inches away. Silence swallowed the marketplace. One guard drew his sword. Who dares obstruct his grace? Several soldiers rushed toward Alara. The little boy clung to her, sobbing. His mother fell to her knees beside them, overcome with relief. The captain raised a hand. Arrest the girl. Before anyone could move farther, another voice emerged from the carriage. Stop. It carried neither anger nor force. Only quiet certainty. Every soldier froze instantly. The carriage door opened. Duke Adrian stepped onto the street. His polished boots crossed the sea of scattered petals until he stood before Alara. She lowered her eyes respectfully, expecting punishment. Instead, he noticed something resting among the crushed flowers. One white rose. Untouched. Its petals glowed against the gray stones, impossibly perfect despite the chaos surrounding it. For an instant the marketplace disappeared. He remembered another white rose resting upon his mother's bedside the morning she died. She had smiled despite her pain. Even the smallest flower, she had whispered, can remind someone that goodness still exists. The memory tightened around his heart. Alara carefully picked up the untouched bloom and brushed away a trace of dust. She extended it toward him. You should have this, Your Grace. He looked at her with quiet surprise. You've lost everything. It is only one flower. It may be your last sale today. She offered a faint smile. My grandmother says lonely people deserve flowers most of all. The words struck deeper than she could possibly know. Adrian accepted the rose with unusual care. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a heavy leather pouch filled with gold coins. Gasps erupted throughout the square. He placed it gently in her hands. She stared at the fortune before slowly closing his fingers around it again. I cannot accept this. You earned it. No, Your Grace. Her voice remained calm despite dozens of curious eyes watching every breath. I sell flowers. She met his gaze for the first time. I do not sell my dignity. The marketplace fell utterly silent. For the first time in years, something warmer than duty stirred inside Adrian Ashford, while across the square Lady Vivian, hidden beneath the shade of her carriage window, watched the exchange with growing disbelief, realizing that the poor flower girl she had humiliated only moments before had accomplished what none of the kingdom's noble women had managed in years. She had made the Duke smile. No one in the marketplace spoke until the Duke turned toward the captain of his guard. The silence stretched so long that even the restless horses seemed unwilling to disturb it. Adrian glanced once more at the crushed flowers scattered across the stones before returning his attention to Alara, whose hands remained folded before her despite the dust clinging to her dress. What is your name? He asked quietly. Alara, Your Grace. And these flowers? I grow every one of them. His eyes drifted across the broken bouquets. They were arranged with remarkable care despite their humble origins. Every stem had been tied with faded ribbon, every color thoughtfully paired, as though beauty deserved devotion regardless of who could afford to admire it. You cultivate them yourself? She nodded. My grandmother taught me. Adrian remained silent for a thoughtful moment before addressing the captain. See that the child's family reaches home safely. The captain bowed. At once, Your Grace. Then the Duke looked back at Alara. The palace gardens require fresh flowers every week. Confused murmurs swept through the crowd. I have dismissed 3 suppliers this year, Adrian continued. Their flowers lacked care. Alara blinked. I don't understand. I would like you to provide them. She stared at him, convinced she had misunderstood. The palace? If you are willing. The marketplace erupted into whispers. A poor flower seller receiving royal employment was unheard of. Lady Vivian watched from across the square, her elegant smile frozen while disbelief slowly hardened into resentment. Alara lowered her gaze. Your Grace. I cannot promise perfection. I am not asking for perfection. His voice softened. I am asking for honesty. She hesitated. I have never entered the palace. Then tomorrow will be your first visit. Adrian inclined his head before returning to his carriage. As the procession disappeared down the avenue, the marketplace finally found its voice again. Merchants crowded around Alara with astonished expressions. You'll be rich. The Duke himself chose you. What luck! An old baker quietly picked up one surviving bouquet and placed several silver coins into her hand. It wasn't luck, he said warmly. You earned that smile. When Alara reached the cottage long after sunset, Noah raced outside before she reached the gate. You're late. I know. Did you sell everything? She laughed softly. In a way. Agnes listened patiently while Alara described every remarkable moment from the day, leaving out only the part where she had nearly been arrested. When she finally mentioned the Duke's offer, Agnes became unusually still. The palace. The elderly woman whispered. Are you frightened? Agnes forced a smile. No. But worry lingered behind her fading eyes. That night's sleep refused to come. Alara lay awake listening to the wind brushing against the cottage roof while wondering whether she truly belonged anywhere near marble halls and golden chandeliers. Across the city, Duke Adrian stood alone upon a palace balcony overlooking moonlit gardens. The white rose rested inside a crystal vase upon his desk. His elderly steward approached quietly. You seem troubled, Your Grace. Adrian smiled faintly. Not troubled. Curious? Perhaps. The steward followed his gaze toward the flower. I've not seen you keep a bloom in your chambers since your mother's passing. Neither had Adrian. He could not explain why that single rose seemed brighter than every carefully cultivated blossom surrounding the palace. Perhaps because someone who possessed almost nothing had chosen to give it away. Morning arrived wrapped in silver mist. Alara wore her cleanest dress, though repeated stitching could not disguise its age. Noah insisted upon polishing her worn shoes until they reflected tiny patches of sunlight. You'll look like a lady. I already feel like myself. That's even better. Agnes embraced her tightly. Remember who you are. I will. The palace gates towered above her like carved mountains. Towering iron bars opened slowly, revealing immaculate gardens stretching farther than she had imagined possible. Fountains sparkled beneath sculpted trees while roses climbed marble arches in breathtaking abundance. A young gardener greeted her with little enthusiasm. This way. His tone suggested she was little more than another delivery. Servants glanced toward her simple clothing before whispering among themselves. So that's the flower girl. The Duke stopped his carriage for her. I expected someone prettier. Alara pretended not to hear. She had endured harsher words. The head groundskeeper, Master Edwin, inspected her baskets. He lifted one bouquet, examining every stem. Alara waited nervously. Who taught you balance? My grandmother. He nodded. She knew flowers. His approval was brief but genuine. You'll begin with the eastern greenhouse. Hours passed beneath warm glass ceilings fragrant with lilies and lavender. Elara trimmed roses, replaced wilted blossoms, and arranged fresh bouquets throughout the palace corridors. She worked carefully, forgetting the curious eyes following her. Near midday she carried a basket into the library. Adrian stood beside a tall window reading correspondence. He looked up. I was told you arrived. She curtsied awkwardly. I hope the flowers are acceptable. Instead of answering immediately, he approached one arrangement resting upon the windowsill. The colors flowed naturally from deep crimson to pale cream, blending as though gathered by the seasons themselves. You changed the design. I thought this room felt lonely. He almost laughed. It has been lonely for many years. She looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. No. He touched a white blossom thoughtfully. You were correct. An unexpected silence settled between them. Comfortable rather than awkward. What made you begin growing flowers? He asked. My grandmother says every garden is proof that tomorrow deserves believing in. And what do you believe? Elara considered the question. I believe kindness grows the same way. How? Quietly. Their conversation ended only when a servant arrived announcing a council meeting. As Adrian departed, he noticed soil upon the sleeve of his own coat. Elara quickly reached for a cloth. I'm terribly sorry. He glanced down before smiling. It seems gardens have little respect for titles. For the second time, she saw him smile. This one lingered longer. Unfortunately, another pair of eyes witnessed the exchange. Lady Vivian stood at the opposite end of the corridor, hidden behind a marble column. Her jeweled fingernails tightened around her fan. Later that afternoon she entered the palace conservatory where Elara carefully arranged orchids. What lovely work, Vivian observed sweetly. Thank you, my lady. You truly have talent. Relief softened Elara's shoulders. Perhaps yesterday's cruelty had merely been a misunderstanding. Vivian circled the arrangement slowly. I almost regret what happened in the marketplace. You owe me no apology. Oh? I would rather remember today. Vivian smiled. So innocent. Before Elara understood her meaning, the noblewoman gently pushed an entire vase from its pedestal. Glass shattered across polished marble. Water flooded the floor. Flowers scattered everywhere. Servants rushed inside. Vivian gasped theatrically. How careless. Every gaze turned toward Elara. The young gardener sighed. I warned them she wasn't ready. Embarrassment burned across Elara's face. She opened her mouth to explain but stopped. No one appeared interested in hearing the truth. Master Edwin arrived moments later. He surveyed the broken arrangement without speaking. Finally he handed Elara another basket. The ballroom requires flowers before sunset. It will be done. She spent the remaining hours rebuilding every display alone. Her fingers ached. Tiny cuts crossed her palms where broken glass had caught her skin. Still she continued working until twilight painted the palace windows amber. As the final arrangement found its place, Master Edwin inspected every table. He nodded once. Excellent. No praise followed. None was necessary. She had proven something far more important to herself. While leaving through the western gardens, Elara noticed Adrian standing beside a newly planted rosebush. Without ceremony he removed his gloves, knelt upon the earth, and carefully pressed fresh soil around its roots. She stopped, surprised. You garden yourself? He looked over his shoulder. When I need reminding that some things cannot be commanded. She smiled. Flowers bloom because they're loved. And people? They're no different. For a heartbeat neither spoke. The fading sunlight wrapped the garden in quiet gold, yet unseen beyond the hedges, Lady Vivian watched with growing fury, while in another wing of the palace her powerful uncle, Lord Cedric Blackwood, happened to notice the old silver pendant resting against Alara's collar, and the ancient crest engraved upon it stirred a memory he had spent 20 years trying desperately to bury. Lord Cedric Blackwood remained motionless long after Alara disappeared through the western gate. Around him, servants carried watering cans, gardeners trimmed hedges, and evening bells echoed across the palace grounds, yet he heard none of it. His attention lingered upon the image burned into his memory, a weathered silver pendant resting against the flower girl's dress. The crest engraved upon its surface had not been seen openly for 2 decades. It belonged to House Whitmore, a family history had declared extinct beneath smoke and flames. His fingers curled around the head of his cane. Impossible. Dead families carried no heirlooms. Dead children did not grow into young women. Still, the memory refused to release him. That same evening, Cedric summoned his most trusted secretary to his private study. Thick velvet curtains blocked the fading sunlight while a fire crackled quietly inside the marble hearth. "I require information," Cedric said. "Regarding whom, my lord?" "The new palace florist." The secretary frowned. "The flower seller?" "I want her birthplace, her family, every neighbor she has ever spoken to, and every coin she has earned." The man hesitated. "Is she dangerous?" Cedric stared into the fire. "I intend to discover exactly that." Across the palace, Alara prepared fresh bouquets for the breakfast hall. The sting in her hands had worsened overnight where tiny cuts from broken glass crossed her palms, but she ignored the discomfort. Flowers demanded gentle hands regardless of the gardener's pain. Master Edwin approached carrying a bundle of climbing roses. The southern courtyard. She accepted them gratefully. "I'll finish before sunrise." "I know you will." His confidence surprised her. Few people had ever expected anything from her beyond survival. Outside, dawn painted the gardens with shimmering dew. Songbirds fluttered among hedges while soft mist drifted across winding paths. Alara paused beside a weathered oak tree, inhaling the fragrance of roses opening beneath the morning light. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to imagine a future larger than tomorrow's meal. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You speak to flowers." She turned to find Adrian standing several steps away, carrying no attendants and dressed more simply than usual. Embarrassment colored her cheeks. "I didn't realize anyone was here. I've watched the gardeners for years." "And?" "None of them apologize when pruning a branch." She laughed quietly. "They're living things. So are trees. They remember kindness." He tilted his head thoughtfully. "Do you truly believe that?" "I believe everything grows better when treated gently." Adrian reached toward a fading blossom, carefully removing it from the stem. "My mother used to say something similar." "You miss her." The words escaped before Alara realized their boldness. Instead of taking offense, Adrian looked toward the horizon. "Every day." Silence settled comfortably between them. "Not empty. Shared." After a long moment, he gestured toward an empty section of the garden. "Would you plant something there?" "What would you like?" He considered the question. "Whatever gives people hope." She smiled. "Then white roses." His expression softened. "They seem to follow us. Perhaps they're stubborn. Or perhaps they choose their own path." When he walked away, Alara noticed something she had never expected from a duke. He looked less alone. Back at the cottage that evening, Noah greeted her with muddy boots and enormous excitement. "I planted beans." Agnes laughed from her chair. "He planted them upside down. They'll figure it out." Alara knelt beside him. "Plants are patient." "Like you?" She smiled. "I'm still learning." Agnes watched them quietly before reaching beneath her shawl. "I've been meaning to return this." She placed the familiar silver pendant into Alara's hands. "I worried you might lose it while working." Alara fastened the chain around her neck. "You've kept it safe my whole life." It belonged to your mother. The words hung heavily in the room. You've never spoken about her. Agnes looked away. Some memories bloomed slowly. Before Alara could ask another question, Agnes gently changed the subject, asking Noah about his bean plants. The unanswered mystery lingered quietly in Alara's heart. Meanwhile, whispers traveled through palace corridors. Servants noticed how often the Duke visited the gardens. Footmen exchanged knowing smiles. Maids invented stories. Every rumor eventually reached Lady Vivian. She entered her uncle's study without waiting for permission. Cedric barely looked up from several old ledgers spread across his desk. You wish to see me? I wish to ask whether you've lost control of this palace. Vivian folded her arms. That flower girl grows bolder every day. Cedric ignored the complaint. Did you notice the pendant she wears? What pendant? A silver crest. Vivian shrugged impatiently. I noticed the Duke looking at her. Cedric closed the ledger. That concerns me far less. She frowned. You intend to remove her. I intend to understand her. And afterward? His expression remained unreadable. Afterward, we'll decide whether she becomes useful or disappears. The calmness of his answer unsettled even Vivian. Preparations soon began for the annual spring reception, where nobles from across the kingdom would gather beneath crystal chandeliers to celebrate another prosperous season. Master Edwin assigned every floral arrangement to Alara. The ballroom must astonish them. It will. She spent 2 days weaving garlands, polishing silver vases, and arranging thousands of blossoms into graceful displays. Every bouquet reflected balance instead of extravagance, allowing natural beauty to speak louder than expensive decoration. On the morning of the celebration, she entered the ballroom carrying the final basket. Her breath caught. Every arrangement she had completed the previous evening had vanished. Empty pedestals lined the room. Scattered petals covered the polished floor. Someone had destroyed everything. Master Edwin arrived moments later. What happened? I don't know. He studied the wreckage grimly. The guests arrived by sunset. I'll begin again. You cannot finish. I have to. Without waiting for permission, Alara hurried into the palace gardens. Servants watched in disbelief as she gathered armful after armful of blossoms, carrying them alone through endless corridors. Hour after hour she worked without rest. Thorns pierced her fingers. Her dress became streaked with soil. Sweat dampened loose strands of golden hair. Still she refused to stop. Unseen from an upstairs balcony, Lady Vivian observed every exhausting moment. She smiled with quiet satisfaction. If she succeeds, one maid whispered nervously, the Duke will admire her even more. Vivian's smile vanished. Then she must fail. She descended toward the ballroom carrying a small bottle of dark ink. As Alara adjusted the largest centerpiece, Vivian stumbled theatrically beside it. The bottle slipped from her hand. Black ink spilled toward hundreds of white roses. Before it reached them, another hand caught the vase. Adrian steadied the arrangement with remarkable speed. The ink splashed harmlessly across the marble floor instead. Vivian forced a startled laugh. How clumsy of me. Adrian looked at the spreading stain, then at her spotless gloves. You seemed prepared for the accident. Color drained briefly from her face. I don't understand. Neither do I. He turned toward several nearby servants. Clean the floor. Without another word he lifted one heavy basket overflowing with flowers. Alara blinked. Your Grace. Where does this belong? You don't need to. I asked where. She pointed toward the grand staircase. Together they carried arrangements through the ballroom while astonished servants stepped aside. Soil marked the polished sleeve of Adrian's royal coat once again. He did not appear to notice. Neither did he care. The final bouquet found its place moments before musicians announced the arrival of the first noble guests. Crystal chandeliers glowed above thousands of blossoms, transforming the ballroom into a living garden. Applause spread through the crowd as visitors admired the breathtaking display, yet while everyone celebrated the beauty surrounding them, Cedric stood alone beneath the gallery, staring at the silver pendant resting against Alara's heart, finally remembering the tiny infant who had vanished from a burning estate 20 years earlier, and realizing with growing horror that the last Whitmore had somehow survived. Music floated beneath glittering crystal chandeliers while nobles glided across the ballroom in embroidered silks, their laughter rising above the melodies of violins. Every marble pillar overflowed with blossoms arranged so naturally that guests paused to admire them before speaking of politics or fortunes. The fragrance of lilies, roses, and lavender softened even the most formal conversations, weaving together an atmosphere that felt less like a royal palace and more like an enchanted garden. Yet the woman responsible for that beauty remained hidden behind the grand staircase, quietly washing soil from her hands before anyone noticed the tiny cuts crossing her fingers. Master Edwin approached carrying 2 silver goblets filled with cool water. "You've earned a rest." Alara accepted one with grateful hands. "I only did my work." "You did more than that." He glanced toward the ballroom. "You reminded this palace that flowers are meant to be admired, not merely displayed." Before she could answer, a servant hurried toward them. "His Grace requests Miss Alara." Her heart skipped unexpectedly. She followed the servant through crowded corridors until she reached the palace conservatory, where moonlight streamed through towering glass walls and painted silver patterns across the stone floor. Thousands of blossoms surrounded the room in peaceful silence, far removed from the celebration beyond its doors. Adrian stood beside a blooming white rose. "I thought you might prefer this place." She smiled softly. "It feels easier to breathe here." "So I have always believed." For a few moments neither spoke. The quiet carried no discomfort, only understanding. Finally Adrian looked toward the flowers surrounding them. "When I was a child, I often hid here whenever court became unbearable." "You hid?" "A duke was once a frightened boy." She laughed gently. "I find that difficult to imagine. My tutors would disagree." The warmth in his expression surprised even himself. "You changed this palace." "I only arranged flowers." "You reminded people to slow down long enough to notice them." She lowered her eyes. "No one ever noticed mine before." "I did." The simple answer lingered between them longer than either expected. A faint blush colored Alara's cheeks. Before another word could be spoken, footsteps echoed through the conservatory. Lady Vivian appeared gracefully, her jeweled gown shimmering beneath the moonlight. "There you are, Adrian." She looked toward Alara with practiced politeness. "I hope I haven't interrupted." Adrian answered calmly. "We were discussing the gardens." "Of course." Vivian's smile remained flawless. "The guests have begun wondering why their host has disappeared." "I'll return shortly." She inclined her head. "As you wish." While Adrian walked toward the ballroom, Vivian remained behind. The pleasant expression faded from her face the instant he disappeared. "You've become remarkably comfortable here." Alara answered honestly. "I'm simply grateful for the opportunity." Grateful women usually remember their place. "I believe I have." Vivian stepped closer. "No." Her voice turned cold. "You've forgotten it." She circled slowly, studying Alara as though examining something beneath her station. "You imagine kindness makes you equal to us." "I've imagined nothing." "You've stolen attention that does not belong to you." Alara met her gaze steadily. "Respect cannot be stolen." For the first time, genuine anger flashed across Vivian's face. "You speak boldly for someone wearing patched sleeves." "I wear what I earned." Vivian leaned close enough for only Alara to hear. "The palace crushes girls like you every day." She smiled again before walking away. "This one simply hasn't realized it yet." The celebration continued late into the evening. Guests praised the breathtaking decorations while musicians played beneath glowing chandeliers. More than once Adrian noticed nobles admiring flowers instead of jewels, And each time he found himself searching the crowd for the woman responsible. He finally spotted Alara near the western terrace helping elderly servants gather empty vases after the banquet. She worked as tirelessly after the celebration as she had before it. Without hesitation, Adrian crossed the terrace. "Allow me." She looked surprised. "Your Grace, these are heavy." "I've carried them before." Nearby servants exchanged bewildered glances as the Duke lifted 2 overflowing baskets. One elderly maid whispered to another, "I've served this palace 30 years. So have I. I've never seen a duke carry flowers. Neither had anyone else." Far above them, Cedric watched from a balcony hidden in shadow. His eyes never left the silver pendant. The resemblance had become impossible to ignore. Later that night, after the final guest departed, Cedric descended into the palace archives beneath the eastern tower. Dust-covered forgotten shelves stretching into darkness. Candlelight flickered across rows of ancient ledgers recording births, deaths, marriages, and noble lineages. He unlocked a small iron chest hidden behind legal records. Inside rested a bundle wrapped in faded black cloth. His hands hesitated before unfolding it. A tiny silver bracelet appeared. The matching crest gleamed despite 20 years of silence. House Whitmore. His breathing slowed. The bracelet had belonged to the infant everyone believed died during the fire. Beside it lay an old report bearing his own signature. No surviving heirs. Estate secured. Case closed. Cedric crushed the document inside trembling fingers. Someone had lied. Or worse, someone had escaped. The following morning, Adrian requested breakfast in the palace gardens instead of the formal dining hall. The steward looked puzzled. "As you wish, Your Grace." When Alara arrived carrying fresh arrangements, she found a simple wooden table waiting beneath blooming apple trees. "You wish to see me?" "I wish to thank you." "There is no need." "There is." He poured tea into 2 delicate cups. "You've spent weeks bringing life into these gardens." She hesitated. "I shouldn't sit here." "Why not?" "I'm only the florist." "You are my guest." Slowly she accepted the chair opposite him. Morning sunlight filtered through fresh leaves while birdsong replaced courtly ceremony. No servants interrupted. No nobles whispered. For a brief while they were simply 2 people sharing tea among flowers. "What would you do," Adrian asked quietly, "if money never troubled you again?" Alara looked across the gardens. "I would build a place where children without families could learn to grow things." He smiled. "Not jewels. They cannot feed anyone. Not gowns. I already have one. Not a mansion." She laughed. "A roof only needs to keep out rain." Her answers carried no performance. Only truth. He admired that more than any noble accomplishment. When breakfast ended, Noah unexpectedly raced through the garden gate, breathless and smiling. "I found you." Alara stood quickly. "Noah, you shouldn't run inside the palace." "I wanted to bring this." He proudly presented a tiny clay pot containing a single bean sprout. It finally grew the right way. Adrian knelt beside him. "I've heard remarkable things about your gardening. I'm going to grow the biggest roses in the kingdom." "I believe you." Noah beamed. Watching them together stirred something warm inside Alara. For the first time since arriving at the palace, it felt possible that kindness truly belonged here. Unfortunately, another witness observed the tender exchange. Cedric remained concealed behind flowering hedges. He noticed the ease between Adrian and Alara. He noticed Noah. More importantly, he noticed Agnes entering through the garden gate moments later carrying another basket of flowers. The elderly woman's face froze the instant she recognized Cedric standing several yards away. Cedric saw the recognition too. Time seemed to stop. Agnes turned pale. The basket slipped from her hands. White roses scattered across the path exactly as they had on the day Adrian's carriage first stopped. Cedric smiled slowly. Not with pleasure. With certainty. He had seen that frightened face once before, illuminated by flames consuming Whitmore Manor, when a loyal nurse escaped into the night carrying a swaddled infant in her arms. Now, 20 years later, the old woman stood before him with the same haunted eyes, confirming everything his instincts had begun to suspect, while Agnes realized with crushing horror that the man responsible for destroying one family had finally discovered the child he failed to kill. Agnes could no longer carry the burden of silence. Before sunrise the following morning, she asked Alara, Noah, and Duke Adrian to meet her inside the small chapel overlooking the palace gardens. Soft light filtered through stained glass windows, scattering colors across the worn stone floor as the elderly woman clutched the silver pendant with trembling hands. Years of hidden sorrow rested upon her shoulders, and she finally understood that protecting the truth had become more dangerous than revealing it. I have deceived you, Agnes whispered, tears filling her fading eyes. Not because I wished to, but because I loved you too much to lose you. Alara gently held her hands. You never need fear me. Agnes drew a long, shaking breath. 20 years ago, House Whitmore burned in the middle of the night. Everyone believed the family had perished, but I escaped carrying one tiny child wrapped inside a blanket embroidered with white roses. That child was you. The chapel fell silent. Alara stared at the pendant resting in her palm, suddenly understanding why Agnes had always guarded it so carefully. I am not your grandmother, Agnes continued softly. I was your nurse. Your parents begged me to save you before the flames reached the nursery. Adrian stepped closer without speaking, allowing Alara time to absorb the truth. I never wanted your life to be ruled by hatred, Agnes said. So I raised you with flowers instead of vengeance. Tears slipped silently down Alara's cheeks. You gave me everything that matters. Agnes embraced her tightly. You gave me a reason to keep living. The peaceful moment ended as palace guards hurried inside the chapel. Your Grace, the captain said urgently, Lord Cedric requests an emergency audience before the royal council. Adrian immediately understood. The time for hiding is over. Within the great council chamber, nobles filled every seat beneath towering banners while Cedric stood with practiced confidence before the throne. Lady Vivian remained beside him, convinced the influence of the Blackwood family would once again silence every accusation. Cedric bowed gracefully. I bring disturbing news regarding a woman recently welcomed into the palace. His voice echoed across the chamber. The flower seller has deceived the court about her origins. Murmurs spread through the gathering. Adrian entered moments later with Alara beside him, Agnes walking proudly despite her trembling legs. Cedric smiled coldly. Excellent. They have arrived. He raised the silver bracelet recovered from his archives. This belonged to the last Whitmore infant. Then he pointed toward Alara's pendant. And she wears its twin. Several nobles gasped. Cedric folded his hands calmly. Unfortunately, no legal records prove her identity. Anyone might claim such a heritage. Before satisfaction could settle across his face, Agnes stepped forward. I can. Every eye turned toward the elderly woman. She described the night Whitmore Manor burned, the screams echoing through smoke, the desperate parents placing their daughter into her arms, and the men wearing Blackwood colors surrounding the estate before dawn. Her voice never wavered. Neither did the truth. When she finished, Master Edwin unexpectedly approached carrying an old wooden box. I believe this belongs here. Inside rested faded documents discovered years earlier while restoring an abandoned greenhouse once owned by House Whitmore. Hidden beneath weathered boards had been birth records, family seals, and a signed letter naming Alara as the rightful heir should tragedy ever strike. The royal historian examined every page carefully. Finally he stood. The documents are authentic. The room erupted. Cedric's composure shattered. Impossible. Adrian faced the council. Then hear another truth. His voice carried across the chamber with unwavering authority. Lord Cedric Blackwood ordered investigators to erase every record of House Whitmore after the fire. He has concealed theft beneath respectability for 20 years. Cedric lunged toward the documents, but royal guards seized him before he could destroy the evidence. Lady Vivian stepped backward in horror. You cannot believe this. Adrian looked at her steadily. The evidence believes itself. The captain fastened iron chains around Cedric's wrists. His influence ended with the sound of locking steel. Vivian lowered her eyes, understanding that power had finally abandoned her. Within days the kingdom learned the truth. The Blackwood estates were confiscated. Cedric was sentenced to spend the remainder of his life in prison for treason, fraud, and murder. Vivian left the capital quietly with nothing except the pride that had destroyed her future. Justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. The royal court gathered once more, this time for celebration rather than judgment. The king formally restored House Whitmore, presenting Alara with the family crest before nobles and commoners alike. She accepted it respectfully. Then surprised everyone. I accept my family's name, she said, but I will not reclaim their wealth for myself. The hall fell silent. I wish every acre returned to House Whitmore to become public gardens, schools, and homes for orphan children. The king smiled warmly. Your parents would have been proud. So would Agnes. Weeks passed as workers transformed abandoned Whitmore lands into fields bursting with roses, orchards, vegetable gardens, and greenhouses where children learned to cultivate life instead of fearing hunger. Noah became the happiest helper among them. Every morning he proudly carried tiny watering cans twice his size. One afternoon Adrian found Alara kneeling among newly planted white roses. You've accomplished something remarkable. She brushed soil from her hands. We accomplished it. He shook his head gently. No. She looked up. You reminded this kingdom that kindness deserves roots. He reached into his pocket and removed a single white rose. The very first blossom blooming from the restored Whitmore gardens. I bought this. She laughed. From whom? A stubborn little gardener. She smiled knowingly. I hope she charged you fairly. She refused. I suppose some people never learn. Perhaps. He looked toward the quiet road beyond the gardens. Would you walk with me? Together they followed the familiar path leading into the capital. Without explanation Adrian continued until they reached the exact place where his royal carriage had first stopped months earlier. The old fountain still sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Children laughed nearby. Market stalls overflowed with fresh fruit and colorful cloth. Everything seemed ordinary. Yet everything had changed. A small flower cart waited beside the fountain. Master Edwin, Noah, Agnes, palace servants, and dozens of smiling townspeople stood nearby pretending remarkable innocence. Alara looked around in confusion. What is all this? Adrian walked to the cart and placed one silver coin upon its wooden counter. I would like to buy one white rose. She picked up the blossom, unable to stop smiling. This one? This one. She placed it gently into his hands. He accepted it with the same care as the day they first met. Then, before the entire marketplace, Duke Adrian Ashford lowered himself onto one knee. Months earlier people had expected him to punish a poor flower seller. Now they watched the most powerful noble in the kingdom bow before her. My carriage stopped because of a flower, he said, his voice carrying across the silent square. My heart stopped because of the woman holding it. Alara Whitmore, will you honor me by becoming my wife and allowing us to spend the rest of our lives growing hope together? Tears brightened her eyes. You still owe me payment for the first rose. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Adrian smiled. I intend to spend a lifetime repaying that debt. She nodded through joyful tears. Then yes. Cheers echoed across the marketplace as bells rang from every tower in the capital. Months later their wedding filled the palace gardens with thousands of blooming white roses. Agnes proudly walked Alara to the ceremony, Noah carried the rings with determined seriousness, and Master Edwin planted a new rosebush beside the chapel after the vows were spoken. Years passed gently thereafter. The orphan gardens flourished, hungry families found honest work among blossoms instead of despair, and every spring the Duke and Duchess personally handed white roses to children throughout the kingdom. Whenever visitors asked why those flowers bloomed in every corner of Vale Dorn, their young daughter would simply smile and answer, because one kind heart stopped a royal carriage, and one white rose taught an entire kingdom that true nobility grows from compassion. Their laughter drifted across endless gardens, where love, justice, and hope blossomed together at last, forever.